June 1944. Normandy, France. The Allied invasion has succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. The beaches are secure, supplies are flowing, and thousands of troops are pushing inland. On paper, the breakout from the beachhead should take days, maybe a week. In reality, the entire Allied advance has ground to a complete halt, and the reason is something that no general, no intelligence officer, no war planner ever considered a serious obstacle. Hedgerows, not minefields, not concrete bunkers, not Tiger tanks or elite SS divisions. The thing stopping the most powerful military force ever assembled was farmland. Ancient, overgrown, nearly impenetrable farmland that the French had been cultivating for 1,000 years. This is the story of how a sergeant from Tennessee, with no engineering background, solved a problem that was costing hundreds of American lives every day. How his solution was born from desperation, built from scrap metal cut from Hitler's own beach defenses, and deployed across the entire American front in a matter of weeks. But to understand why this mattered, you need to understand what the hedgerows actually were. Because when American commanders said hedgerows, what they really meant was living fortresses. Picture this. You're a 19-year-old rifleman from Ohio. You've trained for beach landings, urban combat, open field warfare. You've studied your tactics manual, qualified with your rifle, learned how to work with tanks and artillery. You landed on Omaha Beach and somehow survived that nightmare. Now you're a few miles inland, and your squad has been ordered to advance across what the map shows as agricultural terrain. What you actually encounter is nothing like anything in your training. The hedgerow in front of you is 12 feet tall, maybe 15. It's not a hedge in the English garden sense. It's an earthen wall, built up over centuries, 4 or 5 feet thick at the base. Growing out of this wall is a dense tangle of trees, bushes, thorns, and roots so thick you can't see 3 feet into it. And this wall runs along every single field, creating a maze of small enclosures, each one maybe an acre or two in size. The French call them bocage. The word means grove, but that's like calling a fortress a house. These hedgerows divide the entire Norman countryside into thousands of tiny compartments, each one a natural killing ground. Your orders are to advance to the next hedgerow, 200 yards away. Simple enough, right? But the moment you and your squad climb over your hedgerow and drop into the field, you're completely exposed. The field is sunken, often waterlogged, with no cover whatsoever. And in the hedgerow you're advancing toward, you can't see the 3 German machine gun positions and the sniper that are already tracking you. You make it about 50 yards before the firing starts. The squad scatters, looking for any depression in the ground that might provide cover. But there isn't any. Some men make it back to the hedgerow you came from. Some don't make it anywhere at all. After 15 minutes of this, your squad leader calls for tank support. The Sherman tank arrives. And this should solve the problem. 75mm gun, machine guns, armor that can withstand rifle fire. The tank commander gets the same order. Advance to the next hedgerow and suppress the German position. But here's where the nightmare really begins. The Sherman tries to push through the hedgerow. The front of the tank tilts up as it tries to climb the earthen bank. Up, 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 until the tank's belly is completely exposed, showing its thinnest armor to anyone with a Panzerfaust or an anti-tank gun. Often the tank tips up so far that its gun can't depress enough to aim at anything. It's stuck, vulnerable, immobilized. If the tank tries to back down and find a gap in the hedgerow instead, that means staying on the sunken roads that run between the fields. And these roads are death traps, perfectly channeled killing zones, where German anti-tank guns have pre-registered firing solutions. This was the tactical situation facing American forces across the entire Normandy front in June and July, 1944. Every field was a separate battle. Every hedgerow was a fortress. Units that would normally advance miles in a day were measuring their progress in hundreds of yards. The casualties were staggering. The planners back in England had completely underestimated the problem. Oh, They knew about the hedgerows. The intelligence reports mentioned them. But no one who hadn't actually fought in the bocage understood what it meant tactically. They thought tanks could just push through or go around. They thought infantry could use standard fire and maneuver tactics. They were wrong, and men were dying because of it. Various solutions were attempted. Engineers tried using explosives to blow gaps in the hedgerows, but this was slow, dangerous work, and it warned the Germans exactly where you were going to attack. Some tank crews tried using their tanks' weight and power to simply crash through, but this rarely worked and often got the tanks stuck or disabled. The commanders knew they had a crisis. The breakout from Normandy had to happen. The entire invasion timetable depended on it. But you can't order men to advance when every advance is suicide, and you can't order tanks forward when the terrain itself is an anti-tank weapon. Enter Sergeant Curtis G. Cullen, a tanker from the 2nd Armored Division. Cullen was a cab driver from New York before the war. No engineering degree, no technical background beyond basic mechanical knowledge. But he'd been fighting in the bocage for weeks, and he'd been thinking about the problem the way a cab driver thinks about traffic. There's got to be a better route. The idea came to him while looking at the German beach obstacles that were being cleared from the landing areas. These were steel structures designed to rip the bottoms out of landing craft. Heavy, strong steel, welded into crosses and frames. And there were thousands of them. Now just scrap metal sitting on the beaches. Cullen realized that if you could attach steel prongs to the front of a Sherman tank, below the hull, you could change how the tank interacted with the hedgerow. Instead of climbing up and exposing its belly, the tank could cut into the earth bank itself. The steel prongs would act like tusks, digging into the hedgerow and giving the tank's tracks purchase to drive forward, staying level instead of tipping up. It was simple, maybe too simple. But Cullen was in a position where he could actually test it. He scrounged some beach obstacles, got a cutting torch, and worked with the maintenance section to weld the steel prongs onto a Sherman. The result looked crude, almost medieval. The prongs stuck out from the front of the tank like the tusks of some mechanical boar. They tested it on a hedgerow behind the lines. The tank driver accelerated toward the earthen wall, and everyone waited for the familiar tilt as the tank tried to climb. But it didn't happen. The steel prongs bit into the earth. The tracks dug in, and the Sherman just powered straight through the hedgerow like it wasn't even there. On the other side, the tank was level, mobile, and in perfect position to support the infantry. The men watching that first test knew immediately what they were seeing. This wasn't just an improvement. This was a game changer. Word spread fast. Within days, every tank commander in the area wanted these Tusks on their Sherman. The problem was manufacturing them at scale. Each set of prongs had to be cut from the beach obstacles, sized to fit a Sherman, and welded on properly. And there were hundreds of tanks that needed them. But this is where the American industrial mindset kicked in. Maintenance crews organized production lines. They set up cutting stations on the beaches, welding stations near the tank depots. Tanks would cycle through, get their modifications, and head back to the front. Engineers refined the design, finding the optimal length and angle for the prongs. Someone came up with a better welding pattern that was faster to apply. The device got a name, the Cullen cutter, though the men just called them Rhino tanks because of the horn-like prongs. And by late July, hundreds of Sherman tanks had been equipped with them. The impact on combat operations was immediate and dramatic. Tank infantry teams that had been stalled for days could suddenly advance through multiple hedgerows in a single day. The Germans had built their entire defensive strategy around the bocage terrain. They'd positioned their forces expecting the Americans to be channeled, exposed, vulnerable. Suddenly, American tanks were appearing where they shouldn't be able to go, bursting through hedgerows and catching German positions from unexpected angles. The psychological effect was significant too. American infantry, who had been dreading every hedgerow assault, now advanced with their tank support, knowing they weren't going to be abandoned in the middle of an open field. The tanks themselves were taking fewer casualties because they weren't exposing their bellies or getting stuck. When Operation Cobra, the breakout offensive, launched on July 25th, 1000 944. 60% of the American tanks involved had Rhino modifications. The operation succeeded beyond all expectations, punching through German lines and creating the gap that would eventually lead to the liberation of France. Curtis Cullen was promoted and awarded the Legion of Merit for his innovation. But in typical soldier fashion, he downplayed his role. He insisted that lots of men had been working on the problem, that he just happened to have the right idea at the right time, and that the real heroes were the maintenance crews who manufactured thousands of the cutters under combat conditions. But here's what makes the story remarkable, beyond just the tactical innovation. The Cullen cutter was born from the same principle that created the Sullivan reflector sight. Listen to the men actually doing the fighting. The solution didn't come from the tank designers at the Aberdeen Proving Ground. It didn't come from the tactical theorists at the Command and General Staff College. It came from a cab driver turned tank sergeant who looked at a problem with fresh eyes and refused to accept that this is just how it is. The Army could have shut Cullen down. Unauthorized modifications to military equipment were forbidden. There were regulations, procedures, chains of command. A sergeant wasn't supposed to be redesigning tanks. But somewhere in that chain of command, someone with actual authority and common sense saw what Cullen had created and said, yes, do this. Do it now. Do it to every tank we have.